My husband said running the house was the bare minimum a Roomba could handle, so I got a job and left him to do everything until he accidentally sent our daughter to school with his mom's prescription narcotics instead of her lunch and got us investigated by child services while she became known as the substance girl, and he nearly lost his job and our kids because he couldn't even remember to pay the electric bill. My husband Mark has always said that me taking care of the whole house was the bare minimum. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, homework help, school lunches, driving to practice, making beds, grocery shopping, literally everything except his job was apparently a piece of cake. He'd walk in at 5 and plant himself in front of the TV with a beer by 6, while I hadn't stopped moving since dawn and wouldn't till bedtime. Thing is, it never even bothered me until I started paying attention to what Mark really thought of me. It was always just little comments at dinner I'd dismissed. Like when our daughter Eunice talked about her friend's mom who was a surgeon, and Mark would say, "Now that's a real career," while looking directly at me. Or when Mark would introduce me at his company events, and when asked what I do for work, he'd say, "She's just a housewife." The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. He'd walk past me scrubbing toilets and sarcastically say, "Rough life." At parent-teacher conferences, he'd interrupt me to translate what the teacher means to me, like I was too stupid to understand English. When the washing machine broke and I fixed it using YouTube, he told his friends I got lucky pressing buttons. He'd FaceTime his mom while I cooked dinner and pan the camera over me saying, "Look, Mom, Jenny's pretending to be busy again." When I organized our taxes, receipts, and bills every year, he'd joke that even monkeys can sort papers. When our neighbors noticed how exhausted I seemed and suggested to Mark that I could use some help, he said that hiring a maid would be pointless since Jenny barely does anything a Roomba couldn't handle. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. And then during one family dinner, I hit my boiling point. Mark's brother was visiting, and Mark was going on about his latest promotion, which I was super happy about BTW. His brother asked what I'd been up to after hearing Mark's monologue. I actually got excited. Nobody really asked me what I was up to. I went to answer, but before I could, Mark jumped in with, "Oh, you know my Jenny. She doesn't do a whole lot. Deciding between paper and plastic straws is probably her biggest decision of the day." Everyone laughed. Even my kids laughed. I sat there cutting my chicken and realized something changed inside me. That night, I updated my resume for the first time in 15 years. I'd been a marketing director before Eunice was born, but Mark had insisted one of us should stay home. Well, now, I applied to 5 jobs, and pretty soon I got an offer from a tech startup. The salary was $15,000 less than Mark's, but I accepted it immediately. Sunday night before my Monday start date, I made a nice dinner, pot roast, which was Mark's favorite. And as we ate, I mentioned casually that I'd gotten a job and would be starting tomorrow. Mark chuckled like I was a comedian. "Right, doing what exactly?" I explained to him about the marketing position and watched his face change. The kids looked confused like they couldn't process Mom doing anything outside the house. "You can't be serious," Mark said. "Who's going to handle everything here? The kids have practice and Eunice has her recital coming up and my mother needs her prescriptions picked up every week and I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said, taking another bite of pot roast. The next morning I left at 7 a.m. sharp. Mark was scrambling trying to figure out the coffee maker. Eunice was yelling about not having clean volleyball shorts. Chris couldn't find his science textbook. I grabbed my purse and my travel mug and walked out the door. My first week was incredible. I'd forgotten how good it felt to use my brain for something beyond familial planning. My coworkers treated me like an actual person with thoughts and ideas. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up. Mark missed an important client meeting because he had to pick up Chris from school. Eunice had to wear dirty gym clothes. They ate takeout 4 nights in a row. By week 2, Mark was begging me to quit. "This isn't working, Jenny. The house is a disaster. I can't manage my job and all this other stuff." "Other stuff?" I asked. "You mean the bare minimum?" Month 1 ended with Mark gaining 15 pounds from fast food and his boss pulling him aside about his sudden performance issues. The kids were constantly complaining. Eunice missed her recital because Mark forgot to put it in his calendar. Chris failed a test because no one helped him study. By month 3, Mark's life was in shambles. His brother came for Thanksgiving and couldn't believe the state of the house. Dishes piled up, laundry everywhere. Mark looked exhausted with bags under his eyes. His brother actually said, "Dude, what happened to Mr. I make the money?" I had to hide my smile behind my wine glass. Month 4 brought the breaking point. Mark's company announced layoffs. He called me sobbing from his car. "Jenny, I can't lose this job. Not now. Not when I can barely function. Please, I'm sorry. I had no idea what you did. I'm drowning here." I agreed to help him through the layoff scare, but told him things would be different. He had to start picking weight up around the house. He agreed before I even finished my sentence. 1 week later, I got promoted. Things were honestly running pretty smoothly, both at work and at home. But then while I was at work, someone knocked on my office door. "Your husband called 6 times about some emergency with your daughter's school?" I looked at my phone. 34 missed calls, 15 from the school, a voicemail from the police. Mark's last text read, "Jenny, please call me back. I think I really messed up, like legal trouble messed up." My assistant added, "There's also a woman here claiming to be your mother-in-law's lawyer." I rushed out of the office, my heart pounding as I fumbled with my car keys. The drive to Eunice's school felt like an eternity, even though I made it in 12 minutes flat. Police cars lined the parking lot, their lights flashing against the brick building. Parents clustered in worried groups near the entrance. Mark stood by the principal's office door, his face pale and sweaty. He grabbed my arm the moment he saw me. His hands trembled as he pulled me aside, away from the other parents. The principal emerged from her office, her expression stern. She motioned for us to follow her inside. The small room felt suffocating with Mark, me, the principal, principal, and 2 police officers all crammed together. One officer held a plastic evidence bag containing what looked like prescription bottles. Mark shifted nervously in his chair as the principal explained. Apparently, he'd been picking up his mother's prescriptions that morning and left the bag in the car. When he dropped Eunice off late, she'd grabbed what she thought was her lunch bag. Instead, she'd brought a bag full of controlled substances into school. The situation escalated when Eunice, confused about why her lunch looked different, showed the bottles to her teacher. The teacher immediately called the office. The school went into lockdown. Police were called. Substance-sniffing dogs swept the building. I watched Mark sink lower in his chair as the officers explained the severity of bringing prescription narcotics onto school property, even accidentally. They mentioned words like endangerment and negligence and investigation. My stomach churned. The principal informed us that Eunice was traumatized. She'd been questioned by police, removed from class in front of everyone, and was now sitting in the nurse's office crying. Other parents were demanding answers. The school board would need to meet about this incident. After an hour of questioning and paperwork, the officers decided not to arrest Mark, but warned this would be thoroughly investigated. We'd need to attend mandatory meetings with child services. The school was considering suspension for Eunice, even though she'd done nothing wrong. I found Eunice in the nurse's office, her face red and puffy from crying. She wouldn't even look at Mark. On the drive home, she sat in the back seat, arms crossed, staring out the window. Mark tried to apologize, but she just turned her music up louder. At home, Chris was already there, having walked from his school. News traveled fast in our district. He glared at Mark with a mixture of anger and disappointment. Apparently, kids were already texting about Eunice being the substance girl. My phone buzzed constantly. Other parents wanting to know what happened. My boss texting about whether I'd be back today. The school counselor scheduling mandatory sessions. Mark's mother calling repeatedly, confused about why her prescriptions were at the police station. Mark paced the living room, running his hands through his hair. He kept muttering about how this wasn't his fault, how anyone could have made this mistake, but I noticed he couldn't meet my eyes. The doorbell rang. Mark's mother stood there with a woman in a sharp business suit. The woman introduced herself as an attorney, hired to help navigate the situation. She immediately started asking about the school's policies and whether we had grounds to fight any disciplinary action. I excused myself to check on the kids. Eunice had locked herself in her room. Through the door, I could hear her on the phone with friends, trying to explain what happened. Her voice cracked as she insisted she didn't know what was in the bag. Chris sat at the kitchen table, homework spread out but untouched. He looked up when I entered. His expression was serious, older than his years. He asked if we were getting divorced. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I returned to find the lawyer explaining potential consequences. The school could pursue expulsion. Child Protective Services would definitely investigate. Mark might face criminal charges depending on the investigation's outcome. Our family would be under scrutiny for months. Mark really went from Jenny barely does anything a Roomba couldn't handle to accidentally turning their daughter into the school's most infamous lunch bringer in record time. Mark's mother kept insisting this was all a misunderstanding, that her son was a good father, but I caught her giving Mark disappointed looks when she thought no one was watching. She'd warned him about being careless with her medications before. The lawyer left with a retainer check and a promise to contact the school's administration. Mark's mother followed soon after, but not before pulling me aside. She whispered that she'd been telling Mark for months he needed to step up. She'd seen how overwhelmed he was. That evening, nobody wanted dinner. Eunice refused to come out of her room. Chris picked at a sandwich before retreating to play video games. Mark sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, frantically researching legal precedents for accidental substance possession on school property. I tried to focus on work emails, but concentration was impossible. My promotion celebration now felt like a lifetime ago. Everything we'd built, the stability I'd worked so hard to achieve, threatened to crumble because of one careless mistake. The school called again. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning. We'd need to appear and explain ourselves. Other parents were demanding Eunice be removed from school activities until the investigation concluded. Her volleyball season might be over. Mark finally broke down around 10 that night. He sat on the couch, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He admitted he'd been so focused on proving he could handle everything that he'd been cutting corners, leaving things in the car, forgetting appointments, making dangerous mistakes. But his admission felt hollow. The damage was done. Eunice's reputation at school was shattered. The family was under investigation. My new job, which had been going so well, now had this cloud hanging over it. My coworkers would whisper about the woman whose family brought substances to school. I spent the night making lists, lawyers to call, documents to gather, character references to contact. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, handling another crisis, managing another mess, because Mark couldn't handle the bare minimum of family responsibilities. By morning, I had a plan. We'd fight the school's disciplinary action, cooperate fully with the investigation, get Eunice into counseling to deal with the trauma, but things would have to change dramatically at home. Mark's period of struggling through was over. Professional help, household systems, whatever it took. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. I dressed carefully and professionally. Mark wore his best suit, but it hung loose on his frame from all the weight he'd lost. Eunice refused to go, so we arranged for her to stay with my sister. The meeting room was packed. Other parents filled the seats, their faces a mix of concern and judgment. I recognized several from PTA meetings where I'd organized fundraisers and events. Now they looked at us like we were dangerous strangers. The board president called the meeting to order. What followed was an hour of heated discussion about school safety, zero zero-tolerance policies and the message this sent to other students. Parents stood up one by one, expressing their fears and demanding action. Mark tried to explain, his voice shaking. He outlined the morning's chaos, his mother's medical needs, and the honest mistake. But his words fell flat against the wall of parental anger. Someone mentioned calling local news stations. Another suggested a petition to ban our family from school property. I finally stood up. My voice was steady as I reminded them of my years of volunteer service, the fundraisers I'd organized, the classroom parties I'd hosted. I asked them to consider the trauma already inflicted on an innocent child who'd done nothing wrong except grab the wrong bag. The room fell silent. A few parents looked uncomfortable, remembering the times I'd helped their children or supported their causes. But the damage to our reputation was clear. Even if Eunice stayed in school, she'd carry this stigma. Kids could be cruel, and parents could be worse. After the meeting, we sat in the car in silence. Mark stared at the steering wheel, looking defeated. I thought about all those dinners where he'd minimized my contributions, all those times he'd called my work the bare minimum. Now he couldn't even manage that without creating a crisis that threatened everything. My phone buzzed with a text from my boss. She was understanding but concerned. This kind of family drama could affect my performance, my reputation at the company. The promotion I'd worked so hard for suddenly felt precarious. One family crisis bleeding into my professional life. We drove home to find reporters from the local paper parked outside. Apparently, someone from the meeting had called them. Substance scare at local elementary would make a compelling headline. Mark ducked inside while I politely declined to comment. Inside, Chris was stress-eating cereal from the box while playing video games. He'd skipped school, too embarrassed to face questions about his sister. The house felt like a bunker, all of us hiding from the outside world and from each other. I realized then that Mark's inability to handle basic household management had created a cascading failure. One mistake with a prescription bag had unraveled months of progress. My job, the kids' stability, our family's reputation, all hanging by a thread because he couldn't keep track of simple things. The lawyer called with updates. The police investigation would take weeks. Child services would start home visits soon. The school board would vote on disciplinary action at next month's regular meeting. In the meantime, Eunice would attend classes under a safety plan that felt more like punishment. That night, I lay awake thinking about how we'd gotten here. From Mark mocking my contributions to him nearly destroying our family through sheer incompetence. The man who thought running a household was beneath him had proven he couldn't even do it safely. The next morning brought fresh challenges. Eunice's volleyball coach called to say she was benched pending investigation. Her grades were slipping from the stress. Chris was acting out, getting into arguments with teachers. The family was fracturing under the pressure of Mark's mistake. I threw myself into damage control. Meetings with lawyers, school administrators, and counselors filled my days. My understanding boss granted me flexibility, but I knew her patience wasn't infinite. The promotion I'd earned was slipping away as I dealt with another family crisis. Mark, meanwhile, seemed paralyzed. He went through the motions of his job but came home defeated each day. He'd started seeing the household responsibilities he'd mocked as insurmountable obstacles. The confident man who'd belittled my work was gone, replaced by someone overwhelmed by laundry and meal planning. 3 weeks into the crisis, child services made their first home visit. They inspected everything, asked probing questions, and took notes on their tablets. They interviewed each child separately. Eunice cried through her interview. Chris was sullen and uncooperative. Mark stammered through his explanations. The investigator's report would determine whether we kept our family intact. The weight of that possibility hung over every interaction. Simple conversations became tense negotiations. Family dinners were silent affairs, each of us lost in our own fears about what might happen next. I found myself doing what I'd always done, managing everything. But now it felt different. This wasn't about proving my worth or gaining respect. This was about survival, keeping our family from completely imploding because Mark couldn't handle basic responsibilities he'd dismissed as trivial. The irony was bitter. All those years of him calling my work the bare minimum, and he couldn't even meet that bar without endangering our children and destroying our reputation. The man who thought I did nothing had proven that doing it all required skills he simply didn't possess. As another sleepless night stretched toward dawn, I wondered if we'd ever recover from this. The investigation would eventually end, but the damage to our family might be permanent. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. And Mark had shattered more than just trust. He'd destroyed the very foundation of our children's security. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more damage control, more attempts to piece together what Mark's carelessness had broken. The bare minimum had never felt so impossibly hard to achieve. The morning after my sleepless night, I woke to find Mark already gone. A sticky note on the coffee maker read that he'd left early to meet with his boss about the performance issues. I got the kids ready in silence, Eunice barely touching her breakfast while Chris kept his headphones on the entire time. At work, my team had prepared for our quarterly presentation to the board. I'd been leading this project for weeks, and it represented everything I'd accomplished since my promotion. But as I reviewed my slides one last time, my assistant knocked urgently. Mark was in the lobby, insisting he needed to speak with me about a family emergency. I found him pacing near the security desk, disheveled and frantic. He grabbed my shoulders the moment he saw me, explaining that child services had called about an immediate home inspection. They'd received an anonymous tip about neglect and wanted to investigate within the hour. My presentation was in 30 minutes. My boss appeared in the lobby, having heard about the commotion. She looked between Mark and me with concern. I explained the situation briefly, watching her expression shift from sympathy